Okay, so I'm going to just talk to you now about the quality control settings, which are really important if you're doing 3D printing and what that looks like. So at this stage, you will have been on a software, whichever software you've chosen to use. I've used Tinkercad, and you've made a 3D model. And it's really important, first of all, before you do anything now with this 3D model, that it is all one solid object. So you can see I've made this up of all different components. I have rendered it as one solid object, and that should make it 3D printable. If it's all separate objects and they're all just overlapping each other, it's not going to work. And it's the same if you're doing it on something like SketchUp. It's not quite as easy as Tinkercad to do, but you need to go into your model and make sure there's no lines or inserts or anything hidden in there that isn't going to be 3D printed. And once you've done that, we come up here to export, and we then export it as what we will call an STL. Okay, so the STL creates it into a little exportable model. So then we come across here into whatever slicing software you're using. We have a Prusa machine for our 3D printer, and so we use Prusa Slicer. And then if you go to File, Import, you can import an STL object. And wherever you've saved it to, so I've saved it onto this SD card as that, and it will import it. So there now is my model, ready to go. And I can just double check that, yeah, it's flat on the floor and so on. Now this is the bit that's important, and this is the bit you need to write about when you're putting this into your GCSE folder work. First of all, you need to check the scale and the size. Look at the height of it in millimeters, and is that what you actually meant for it to be? Because if you've got the scale wrong here, it can be a very slow waste of time. So check the size. I wanted this to print quite quickly, and I'm not fussed, so I'm going to carry on with this. Now the next thing to check is the print settings. So if this is a very rough draft and you're just looking to get it done quickly to prove it works, then get it on there. Get it on the draft setting and off you go. We're going to go with quality rather than detail, and I'm going with the 0.15 mil. It'll take longer, but it'll mean that my product is a really high quality. Again, you should probably test a few different outputs on smaller models so that you can document in your folder that you've tested those and you know which settings are going to give you the best results. Now the filament is the type of plastic you're using. This is absolutely crucial because they all have different temperature settings and different speed settings. So for example, if you're using ABS, which will be there, that will need a much higher temperature. It'll probably need a temperature of around 250 or 260, and it'll also need a higher bed temperature, and it's more likely to warp if you're doing a big setting. We're using PLA, which has a lower heat temperature, but can sometimes warp much quicker. So it's important to make sure that you've got the right setting there, because if the heat settings are wrong, when it comes to actually printing your model, it's not going to work if your temperature settings are wrong. Okay, and then finally down here, make sure you've got the right printer set, because that's going to tell the machine what settings to use, and infill or supports. What supports mean, or if I had a thing sticking out the side here, it can't just print onto air. So as soon as it's going to start printing down, that plastic's just going to fall to the floor, unless you put supports in, which means it will build up a rough support from the ground upwards in order to support that part of the product. So it depends on how ambitious you've been with your 3D printed product. If you were making something like a tree, you'd probably need supports. For this probably won't need supports. They'll probably get in the way. This should be fine at the way that it prints it. And then infill. Infill is, it's speed related and strength related. 100% is going to take a very long time, but your object is going to be solid plastic all the way. whereas 15% is about right, and it just means that it's going to be quite quick, but it's going to be almost hollow on the inside. There's only going to be enough to fill it. 0% is literally, it's hollow. It's a hollow setting, which means it'll be very weak and very brittle. Okay, so once you've done the settings, and again, it's really important that you talk about those settings in your folder to get those marks for quality control, you're then going to click on Slice Now. This can take a little while, but this is converting it into what the 3D printer is actually going to read. And if we have a look here now, this has been sectioned into exactly what the 3D printer can print. When you do this, if your model doesn't look like this, if there are parts missing, then it means your 3D model, the actual CAD model, needs correcting back in whatever software you made it on. So if there's any parts missing or anything that doesn't look right, then you need to go back to the model. It's nothing to do with this software. And then what we do is here you can normally see the layers. So this is broken down into 381 layers, and you can see here how it sort of shows you how it's going to build it up, what it's going to look like on the inside. And if I just sort of zoom in there, I'm not sure if I can actually, but you can see at this point it's going to look like that. It's going to be doing the perimeter, it's going to be doing a very light infill. So you can see that's how it's going to look. It's going to do that first. It's going to build it up. So that could be a little bit tricky, because if you look, that means that's the layer that's sticking to the bed, and then that one, and then that one, and then that one. And actually that's on layer 8, so 8 layers up, it's only just starting to make the base. Really, it should be starting on that point, at layer 49. So those curves could be a bit of an issue there when it comes to actually printing. So it's always worth just checking the layers for any issues. So what I can do here is I can correct this now by basically setting it up to the layer that I want and then moving it down. And you can do that on here by scale factors, size and position. So I can move the position down if I want to. Right, okay, so we're at the 3D printer now, and as you can see you've got the menu, and if I tend to prefer to preheat it, and again we're using PLA, so make sure that you use the correct setting for the plastic you're using, and you can see here that's at 215 in the nozzle and 60 on the bed. So I'm going to hit that and just start to preheat it. If I just lift the camera up, you can see you've got the nozzle there that's heating, and you've got the bed, and I've made it as clean as possible. So again, talk about this in your folder. For quality assurance, we're preheating the bed, and you can see it warming up there, and we've also cleaned the bed to make sure there's no debris or anything that's going to stop that surface from taking first time. We've also made sure that we've loaded the correct filament in the first place. Okay, so if I just position this now, I'm now going to go to print from SD, and you can see here we've got the file there that we've just made. So I'm going to click on that, and there we go. I'm going to leave it, it says 2 hours 39, and we'll come back in a little while and we'll see how it's getting on. Now it's important to just keep checking back in on it, because if the first layer doesn't take, or it lifts or it warps, we need to be able to stop the machine to stop loads of bad stuff from happening. Okay. So as you can see, rather disappointingly, nothing's really taking, and as I feared originally, the lack, let me just pause this. There we go. Now if I didn't stop this in time, this would have all congealed under the nozzle, and it would have been quite a headache for us to repair and fix. But as it is, the nozzle's fine, and I should be able to just remove that quickly. This is why it's really important to check in on it. So as I feared, the surface at the bottom is too thin. There's not enough grip, so I'm going to have to go back into Tinkercad, and I'm going to have to make the bottom surface a bit more flat and a bit more surface area to actually grip on. So you can see here it's worked, but that's all it had to actually grip to, and so it's lifted off and it's all just started to congeal around. Right, so the thing is though, remember, the DT folder is all about trial and error. It's about getting things wrong. So that now is a whole page about the settings I used, the model I used, and why it hasn't worked, and what I'm going to do to fix it. So that's great. I've now got a lot to talk about. Okay, so as expected, it didn't work, but that's okay. There's no harm in trying, and it gives us plenty of stuff to talk about. So what I want to do now is I want to make it more of a surface area for it to actually sit on the base. So if you remember, it was just a very thin area. If I show you how it looks now, sliced, that is it. That's all it has to actually grip it to the base. And then as it goes up, you can see there's more and more and more until it builds it up. But unfortunately, what we really want is for it to be starting around there, maximum surface at the bottom, and then it'll find it very easy to build on that. Whereas trying to build outwards like that, even there would probably work and it'd still give it a bit of a gradient, but that is just not enough to grip at all. Okay, so how do we repair this? How do we fix this? Well, there is an option here that's cut, and it will apply a plane to the model. So if I just click on this and click on cut, and here's the plane, and using the box we can just move it up or down, and I'm going to move it, if I just come down here, I'm going to move it till it's just there. So that's quite a decent amount to grip onto. And I'm going to click upper part, but I don't want to keep the lower part. And I'm going to hit perform cut. And that, as you can see, is just basically giving me a nice flat surface at the bottom there to grip onto. So let's try this again, same settings, don't think there's anything wrong with those. I'm going to hit slice, and I am now going to export the same thing. And if we just look though at the first layer, that's a really nice healthy start. Alright, so the more that's stuck to the layer, the very first layer, the better chance you have of your print working. So I'm just checking in with this, and you can see here that by doing the larger base, it has worked pretty well. And I'm fairly confident that this should work, unless there's a cable fault or a heating fault. This should work pretty well now. So there we go. Okay, so here we can see it's actually looking pretty good. It's only got about 3 minutes left, so it's nearly completed, and even the ears have worked pretty well there. So having that wider base was exactly what we needed. Fantastic. Okay, so here we go. So 2 hours and 28 minutes later, we have a pretty successful print. So if I just come around. There's a little bit of fluff on the top there. That'll come off, we don't really need to do any tooling for that. And actually, you can see there the base of it, nice and wide, and there we go. From a computer to a physical product, pretty nice quality all round. Get rid of some of those whiskers.